DJI back at it again with a new FPV drone product, the DJI Avata. I want to say Avatar because that's what my brain goes to every time I see it, but I believe it's Avata or Avata, something like that. We'll go with Avata because that rolls out the tongue a little bit easier. But what is it, and most importantly, is it for you? That's what we're going to get into this video, so stick around. Here is the DJI Avata. And if you're in the FPV community, otherwise known as a Cinewhoop style of FPV drone. And just in case you don't know, Cinewhoops are FPV drones that's best suited for basically like slower proximity style flying, where bumping into things is more likely because you're trying to thread the needle. It's got 2.9-inch 5-bladed props. It's got a roll cage style design that protects the camera and about half of the battery. The battery is a 4S 2420 milliamp pack that slides into the back like this, and a little connector that pushes in like this. The camera is capable of 4K resolution at 60 frames per second, and as you'll see is on a single axis gimbal for pitch. And if you're wondering what happens with roll, well, that's electronically stabilized, and it happens all within the drone itself. And down here at the bottom, you'll notice some downward facing sensors. However, this is more for just assistance in landing. You can still absolutely crash this if you're not careful. So this has all the same features as its older brother, including Mavic style flight controls, which means up here on the top left side, you've got a rocker's position switch, which allows you to go between N and S modes. And for my advanced pilots, you'll be happy to know that this can also fly in full manual, otherwise known in the FPV community as acro mode. On top of that, you've got a start and stop button for your camera up here. This jog dial over down here controls the tilt of your camera. And then this is going to be really clutch for a lot of the beginners out there. This is what I call the oh shit button. Basically, you hit this and the drone will come to a complete stop no matter what you're doing. All right, so let's move on to the FPV Goggles V2. I'm a little confused about it being called V2 because this is the original V2 goggles, but here's the new one. As you can see side by side, it is significantly smaller, significantly lighter, definitely much more preferred over here. So I'm really glad that DJI went this route. So let's take a closer look. Out in the back, you got this nice cool little cover, which when you pop off, reveals your diopter adjustments per eye, if that will focus. And down here is how you adjust your IPD, and each of these knobs adjusts the focus in each eye. Now you also notice that little button right there, that is for pairing to the drone, and right above that is actually a sensor such that when you take these goggles off of your face, it actually shuts down the screens. Now speaking of screens, it does have micro OLED screens in it, which is really good news. And in case you're wondering, it does 1080p. More on that later. Then up top, you've got these integrated antennas that flip up when you need to use them. However, they are fixed to the goggles, which means that you won't be able to swap these antennas out. At least not easily. One other huge change. That right there is a touchpad, and that replaces the 5-way joystick that used to be on the old goggles. Let's just pause here for a second because I know a lot of you are probably writing down in the comments right now asking, are these the new goggles for DJI's upcoming FPV system? And I think they're calling it O3, OcuSync 3, something like that. And my answer to that is, I don't know. However, it's very highly likely that this is it, and I just say I don't know because they could neither confirm or deny that these are going to be the new goggles. If you ask me, these are it. Now it does have a slightly smaller field of view at 51 degrees. However, it's not something that I notice. But what I do notice is how good it looks, because it is transmitting in 1080p, and at least from the video that's coming out of this drone, it looks super good in these goggles. Just when you thought it couldn't get any better, it does, and I'm super happy about it. Alright, so let's talk about how the DJI Avata flies. And let's get the easy stuff out the way first. If you're coming from the world of, say, a Mavic or a Mavic Air, then you'll feel right at home because the controls are exactly the same. The N mode flies at about half the speed that S or Sport mode does, and as soon as you let go of the sticks, the drone comes to a complete stop and just kind of hovers in place until you give it some stick input again. If you've been building DIY FPV drones for a while now, maybe you know how to tune your own flight controller. If you go from one of those builds to flying this, you're going to think it flies different. And it's an inherent thing because DJI's PID loop algorithm is going to be different from, say, Betaflight, just like how Betaflight feels different from KISS or FetTech. So if you're coming from that world, you're not going to like this for the simple reason that you can't change anything about it. In fact, the only thing you can change are the rates. So if you want to try and dial out that little bit of prop wash, if you want to just behave slightly different, outside of changing your rates, there's really nothing that you can do. Now, all that said, I think that for the type of flying that I would personally do with this type of drone, which is like Cinewhoop style flying, right? It's flying close proximity to things, maybe threading the needle, I think it flies pretty good. I have no problems flying it in tight spaces, small little gaps, and I also have no problems flying it pretty aggressively. And if you really wanted to, you could do some freestyle, but again, power to weight ratio, not quite there, not quite my first choice for freestyle type of flying, but just know that it does have some pretty decent power. And unlike some ducted Cinewhoops that I've tried in the past, this doesn't fly like it's drunk, right? It doesn't wander around, it flies really stable, and pretty much does what you want it to do. So if you are a Cinewhoop type of flyer, or maybe you want to get those Cinewhoop type of shots, this is a pretty good option. Now for me personally, I've actually gotten the most enjoyment out of this by treating it as more of like an exploration type of quad, maybe like a mid-range explorer. And the reason for that is because it actually has really good flight times. Now on paper it says 18 to 19 minutes, however in my experience, that's if you are just mostly hovering around, but as soon as you fly in windy conditions, maybe you're flying in acro mode, and obviously if you fly really hard, then it goes downhill from there. The other thing is that the video and range performance is really good. I was actually able to fly farther with more objects between me and it than I'm able to with like my DJI FPV system on my DIY quads. And so it really kind of encourages you, at least me, to go out there and really just explore things and find like the smallest little nooks and crannies that you can get into. In fact, one of the things that I really got a kick out of was just flying in through these trees and seeing if I could navigate my way out of it. And mind you, I was doing this with the motion controller. So let's start answering some questions. Let's talk about whether or not you should get the radio controller or the motion controller. And I think this is going to come down to one of two things. Okay, if you have aspirations to eventually fly in full manual mode, then this is what you're going to want to get, because there's just no way that you're going to be able to fly in full manual using the motion controller. Now mind you, let me just put this disclaimer out there. If you're a beginner and have never flown in full manual mode, I highly suggest that you spend some time in a simulator to learn the controls, because when you're flying in full manual mode, you're flying it as if it was a DIY hobby aircraft, and there's a pretty steep learning curve. Now, that said, DJI does have an app that you can play on your phone to use as a simulator. I believe it's called the DJI Fly app. Highly recommend that you spend some time in there before you do all the things and fly this in full manual mode. Also, I will recommend this if you just want to be able to fly really fast with a lot of precision. Now on the flip side, maybe you're a beginner, or maybe you're a seasoned FPV pilot, but you just want a very different way of flying an FPV aircraft, then you might want to look at this, because when I reviewed this controller for its bigger brother, I thought it was just more on the gimmicky side. However, trying it on this changed my perspective. Basically, if you want an easy to learn arcade fighter jet style of control, then go for this. It's actually really fun. Like, you put the goggles on, there's a crosshair in your goggles, and you're basically controlling it using this joystick. And how much you pull the trigger determines how fast the drone starts moving. So if you want it to go really fast, squeeze it all the way down. If you want it to just creep, just pull the trigger a little bit. If you freak out, just let go of the trigger, everything comes to a complete stop. And it also has the emergency button here. You can still control your tilt camera here. You can control the modes. You can still pretty much do mostly everything with the motion controller. And as you can see in this footage, I have no problem flying in tight proximity spaces. I just wouldn't be able to do it fast. No, let me take that back. Maybe I could if I spent enough time, but I can absolutely see how a beginner, or like I said, somebody who just wants a different type of flying experience to like something like this. And just to be clear, I would use this for fun only. I wouldn't use this if I'm trying to capture some type of shot. All right, so let's talk about who this product is for. And let's first start off by saying who this is not for. And I think that's going to be an easy one. If you are already invested in the DIY FPV drone side, you've done a couple of your own builds, maybe you already know how to tune a flight controller, and you've got a radio, charger, batteries, etc., this is probably not for you, because none of that stuff is going to transfer over into this. Like, you can't take your 4S battery from your Squirt and make it work with this, or motors or props. On the flip side, if you are completely new to FPV, then I think the roadmap of where you ultimately think you will be is what's going to determine if this is going to be for you. I think that if you know for sure that you will never ever want to cross over into the DIY side, like you'll never want to build your own, you don't want to do the homework of figuring out what parts go with what, you don't ever want to get into PID tuning, then I definitely highly recommend this product, because it just works. You pick this up, you got the radio, you got the goggles, the batteries, everything's chosen for you, it's tuned, there's nothing to figure out, it makes a lot of sense. But remember, there's a possibility that you buy this, you get into it, and you're like, holy moly, FPV is freaking awesome, because it is. You might get this itch to take it further. You might want to get into racing. You might want to get into freestyle. And if you think that that's a possibility, then you might want to consider just going straight into the DIY side, because the knowledge and experience that you get from doing that is going to reflect heavily into your piloting skills, and that's just something that you won't get by just going into something that is ready to fly. Oh, one more person that I would recommend this to, and that is the professional FPV drone pilot. So before we actually go on set, we normally go on what's called a tech scout. And we normally bring a drone, so that way we could throw it up in the air, kind of get a lay for the land, and maybe test a couple of shots out just to see what will work and not work. And because this could act like a Mavic as well as an FPV drone at the same time, and it's got this nice little tiny package, and because you're able to actually plug your phone into the goggles and have it show what the drone is seeing, which you could then hand over to a director and DP, I think it makes for a great tech scout drone. Alright, I think that finally covers everything about the new DJI Avata. That's going to do it, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace out. You're probably more... What I would really... In fact, what I've... And what? Now, I think that the only way that I can... Now, if you're in the FPV community...